When a photographer decides to shoot the same picture of four sisters over the span of 40 years, he has no idea that one day the photos will draw in thousands of people, and he can't imagine that the very last picture will leave every single one of them in tears. Nicholas Nixon, a photographer known for his black and white portraits, was visiting his wife Beeb's family in Massachusetts. In the middle of the visit, he spotted Beeb and her three sisters, Heather, Mimi, and Lori, standing together on the lawn, laughing and chatting under the soft summer sun. On an impulse, Nixon picked up his camera. He had no idea that this simple moment between the four sisters would spark a project that would span 40 years and create a portfolio that would move people beyond words. "Can I take your picture?" Nicholas asked, his voice almost casual, not realizing this would become a lifelong project. The sisters exchanged glances, shrugged, and lined up. Beeb was used to her husband having a camera in his hand constantly, but the other three were slightly less comfortable with the idea. What would happen to the picture? It was 1975, there was no way to see the image until it had been developed. And what if they didn't like the result? Still, they posed naturally, although a slight feeling of awareness came across them. Their brows were furrowed as though they didn't entirely trust Nicholas, and they somehow felt a little closed off, with folded arms and hands in pockets. When Nixon developed the photograph, he was struck by its simplicity and power. There was something timeless about it. Four young women, their lives stretching endlessly ahead, standing together as a family unit, but also as individuals. There was nothing extraordinary about it, but to Nicholas, it felt like a great achievement, and an idea began to form in his head. All he needed was for the four sisters to go along with it. The following year, at the graduation of one of the sisters, Nixon suggested they recreate the image. "Line up in the same order," he said, pointing to where each sister had stood the year before. When the film developed, the similarities and subtle differences between the two photos caught his attention. He saw the smallest signs of change. The way a gaze had softened, the way an arm rested with more ease. "What if we did this every year?" he asked them. To his surprise, they agreed. Without a doubt, none of them guessed the project would last 40 years. Nicholas had no plans for when the project would end. He just wanted to let it run its course naturally. If at any point one of the sisters sensed she'd had enough, then he would stop. For their part, the women thought it might last a couple of years at most before Nicholas moved on to more exciting subjects. One photo a year wouldn't have a huge impact on them. Or so they thought, so began a project that would last 40 years. Every year, the four sisters would stand together in the same order: Heather, Mimi, Beeb, Lori, and allow Nixon to capture them with his 8x10 camera. At first, the photos were just for them, a private ritual shared among siblings and family. But over time, the project gained wider recognition, eventually being exhibited in galleries around the world. The images, intimate and unembellished, mesmerized viewers. Stripped of pretense, they told the story of time itself, of life lived in the small, quiet moments. When the process began, the sisters participated in the annual photo selection with an almost casual attitude. After each shoot, Nixon would lay out the shots and ask, "Which one should we go with?" The sisters might linger for a moment, pointing out small details or quirks they noticed in each frame. At first, the choices felt lighthearted and unremarkable. "This one looks good," one might say, glancing quickly before moving on to something else. The weight of the decision was not yet apparent, and perhaps they didn't fully grasp the gravity these images would one day hold. But as the years passed, the process began to take on new meaning. The annual photographs evolved from a whimsical tradition to something far more intimate. Each sister, now more aware of the significance of the project, began to approach the selection process with greater care. It wasn't just about choosing a flattering image. It was about capturing a moment in time, preserving their essence as individuals and as a collective. They began to see the photographs as part of their shared legacy, a tangible representation of the bond between them, and the passage of time. Nixon, too, noticed a shift. He noted that, particularly, in the final 10 years of the project, the act of choosing the final photo became much more of a collaborative process than it ever had before, as though the sisters finally realized that this had gone way beyond a casual family photograph each year. In the early years, Nixon's voice often held more sway in the final decision. As the artist, he was attuned to technical aspects, lighting, composition, and the balance within the frame. But as time went on, the sisters' voices grew louder and their preferences carried more weight. They began to see the photos not just as his art, but as their story, one they had an equal stake in telling. This collaboration deepened the connection between Nixon and the sisters, as well as among the sisters themselves. Each year, they would gather around to review the photos, now taking their time studying each one. Their discussions became more animated and heartfelt. For Nicholas, this wasn't just about taking a photo. As an only child, he was now getting a unique glimpse into the way siblings bonded, and in particular, the way a sisterhood worked. The collaborative process became as much a part of the tradition as the photos themselves. In the past decade, this dynamic reached a new level of closeness and mutual respect. On one occasion, the sisters were unanimous in choosing a shot that Nixon himself hadn't favored. He initially hesitated, pointing out the technical imperfections in the lighting, but seeing their conviction, he relented. "I have to be fair here," he said, stepping back to let them decide. That moment marked a subtle but significant shift, an acknowledgement that the project wasn't solely his but theirs as well. For the sisters, the annual ritual of choosing the photo became a moment of reflection. It was a time to pause and look at themselves not just as individuals, but as part of something bigger. They saw their younger selves frozen in time, their faces unlined, their eyes brimming with youthful intensity. They saw the gradual changes, the lines that deepened, the hair that grayed, the way their postures softened and leaned toward one another. Most of all, they saw their faces soften, as though over time they'd come to trust Nicholas more. The photos revealed not just the inevitability of aging, but the beauty of how they adapted to it together. Nixon's presence in the process also evolved. In earlier years, he was the outsider looking in, a quiet observer capturing their shared dynamic from behind the lens. But as the years passed, he became more intertwined with their lives, his own rules subtly reflected in the images. His shadow appearing in the 1981, 1983, and 1984 photographs hinted at his desire to join the group he so admired. In the later years, the trust between Nixon and the sisters was evident in their expressions. Their gazes, once wary and private, now held a warmth and openness toward the man who had documented their journey for decades. "We gotten close," Nixon acknowledged simply, a statement that carried layers of meaning. Without a doubt, after 40 years of watching these women evolve, there had to be a high level of love and respect there. But there was so much more to the project than a sisterly bond or a chance to observe the way siblings interacted. It was a deeper meaning that none of them fully grasped just yet. It was only when the full 40-year project finally went on display that it truly hit them and other people what had been achieved over that time. What made the series so powerful wasn't just the artistry of Nixon's photography, but the way it held a mirror to the universal experience of aging. At first, the sisters are impossibly young, their skin smooth, their eyes bright with possibility. But as the years pass, the signs of time begin to show, a wrinkle etched by laughter, a strand of gray hair, a change in posture. While society often asks women to hide these marks of time, the Brown sisters stood before the lens each year and said, "This is us." There were no overly forced poses, fake smiles, or retouching of the images. They were raw and simple, yet beautiful. The sisters had given away very little about their lives, yet in those photos, they seemed to give everything away. It sent an important message: growing old is a privilege, not something to be hidden. In the 40th year of the project, a collective decision was made to end it. The project could have easily gone on for another 10 or 20 years, but the reflections it had provided the sisters with were now far more powerful than more photographs. They had never been a family who dwelt on appearance, but seeing all 40 photographs laid out made them truly appreciate all the ways in which they had changed. The aging process, particularly for women, can be hard. Society often tells them that wrinkles should be smoothed out, gray hair should be covered up with dye, and that a youthful appearance is far more appealing. But the 40 photographs defied that thinking. The project showed 4 ordinary women not fighting against the aging process but embracing it. It wasn't just the art of aging that was a privilege for the sisters to see, though. With all the photos out in front of them, it was clear to see that the passage of time had also brought them closer. In the early photographs, they stood apart, their postures more individualistic, their gazes tinged with a youthful self-consciousness. But as the decades rolled by, the physical closeness between them grew more apparent. An arm would drape over a shoulder, a hand would rest on a waist, their bodies leaning subtly into one another. It was as though time, rather than pulling them apart, was binding them closer together. By the time the series reached its 4th decade, the sisters were no longer young. Their faces bore the weight of their lives, the joys, the sorrows, the struggles, and triumphs etched into the lines around their eyes and mouths. Yet there was a quiet dignity in their presence, a confidence that came not from resisting the aging process, but from accepting it. This acceptance, so beautifully captured in the final photographs, was what made the last image so poignant. It was the ending of a beautiful project, but perhaps the beginning of a new way of approaching the art of aging. When viewers walked through the exhibition, tracing the journey of these 4 women from their 20s to their 60s, they often found themselves overcome with emotion. It wasn't just the inevitability of time that brought tears, but the way the sisters had faced it, with grace, authenticity, and resilience. The last photo was the one that seemed to leave everyone in tears as observers saw something of themselves in the project. Naturally, the series shows the passing of time and the fragility of life, but the final photo also seems to capture the beauty of it all, the way they're all leaning into one another, the soft smiles on their faces. It forces people to accept that nothing lasts forever. But it was one particular sister that seemed to confront people with this idea more than the others. Mimi, the second sister on the left. Throughout the project, she was always the one with the sternest look on her face. In the very first photo, she appears to be almost frowning. Although she has her arm around her sister's shoulders, she has created a physical gap between them as though keeping part of herself guarded. The stern look continues on Mimi's face for many years throughout the project, becoming something of a trademark. Even the photographs where the sisters appear more relaxed or playful, Mimi's expression holds a certain distance, a quiet reserve that sets her apart. Yet in the final photo, we see a completely different version of the woman. There is a softness to the small smile she wears, one that feels earned with time. But this time, the gesture is loving and tender, a physical reminder of the closeness they cultivated over decades. Her face, etched with lines of experience, tells a story of growth and acceptance, but her eyes show a sadness, perhaps at the ending of the project or perhaps as a reflection of everything it has meant to her. The way has brought them all closer together and how it has charted their lives in a way few families experience. Whatever the reason, there's no denying that Mimi in particular is the one who leaves people in tears for reasons they can't always explain. Her transformation from guarded and stern to warm and reflective strikes a chord with those who stand before the images. It forces them to confront their own changes, to reflect on their own lives, and to wrestle with the passage of time. It's not just her expression in the final photo, but the years of unspoken emotion captured in the earlier ones that make her presence so powerful. Her quiet vulnerability in that last image becomes a mirror, reflecting the beauty and heartbreak of aging and sibling bonds. It is never easy to see yourself change, but very few people get to witness it in the way the Brown sisters did. What was even harder was to let the world see the way they had changed. But that's perhaps the most important part of the project, the way the sisters allowed themselves to be seen year after year, just as they were, without pretense or apology, or the need to explain anything about themselves. Their openness to show themselves in the photographs, yet their guarded nature about their lives, gave people a lot to think about. It made people confront some of the fears or stereotypes they held about aging and invited them to see beauty, strength, and grace in the process of growing older. For many, it was a revelation, not just about the sisters, but about themselves. In the end, the Brown Sisters is more than a series of photographs. It's a personal project spanning 40 years that was shared with the world as a reminder that aging is not something to fear, but something to embrace. The last photo doesn't leave us in tears because it marks an ending. It leaves us in tears because it shows us the beauty of life as it truly is, fleeting, imperfect, and profoundly meaningful. Does the last photo move you to tears? Do you think the world should be more accepting of the aging process? Let us